Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to the Rattlecast. We're the biggest freewheeling live streaming poetry podcast on the planet. Our guest for the Rattlecast number 298 is John Poch. He'll be here in just about 5 or 7 minutes or so. But before you should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this. We love poetry. I know you do too, so please do click on the mic, share, make sure you're subscribed. Whatever you can do to help spread poetry around the internet, we much appreciate it. And we're going to start out like we always do with our Poet Respond poem. And we've got a veteran Poet Respond poet here today with us. Lexi Pelle is here with another a really moving poem about something. I hadn't seen this story, and so thinking about it and connecting with it in the way that poems do was really powerful. Hey, Lexi, how you doing?
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to have you here again. You know, you're one of those poets that submits for Poet Respond really frequently, and it's so glad, I'm so glad that you do because, we always have great poems, and this is another one that was really moving. How did you come across this news story, and how did you know that this was the one you wanted to write about this week?
Um, well, probably because it scared me to write about. As you probably have seen, I tend to write a little bit more like on the sillier side of the news, like, kind of like lighter hearted stories. And I saw it and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I was like, oh no, I think this means I have to write a poem about it because it was kind of haunting me. Like I kept thinking about it. And yeah, I kind of I just kept mulling over it, and I think my fear with anytime when I'm writing about something more serious, I was like, do I have anything to say other than like, oh, this is sad, and how can I build off of, like how can I make allow the poem to discover into something? And I think that was like really the biggest struggle with the poem. I think the first kind of insight I have had was if I took it from the woman's mother's perspective, I could kind of get to something a little different.
Mhm.
So that was like a big like door opening moment for me. I was like, okay, now I have a way into the poem. So that was really huge for
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Well, can you explain the story? The poem is "Brain Baby of Brain Dead Woman Delivered in Georgia," which, like you often do, is the title of the news story that was
Yeah.
inspired. Yeah. So tell us what this story was and what happened.
Yeah, so a woman unfortunately she she was brain dead. She was 6 weeks pregnant, and because of the laws in Georgia, she was required to be kept on life support until she could have the baby. And I read in the story, actually, I did cut the title in half. It was actually "Baby of Brain Dead Woman Delivered in Georgia, Woman's Mother Says."
Mhm.
And that was the full title. So that was kind of like where the mother came in. And yeah, the mom, it seemed like, didn't really want this. And she, I think was just it just was really sad. It was just a really tragic story. And I think and because her mom was in the news story, that's kind of where she came in into the poem. But
Mhm.
yeah, she had brain clots in her brain, and I obviously you know, I was reading a lot of, people's comments on it, and it was just it was awful. And I felt, yeah, I just thought it was a really, really sad story. And because the Georgia's governor, Brian Kemp, he signed like a near total abortion ban. So that's kind of like this was, a story responding to that. And that also scared me because I was like, what do I have to say other than just agreeing with what people are saying? So I was like, I have to find a way to say something else. Like I always feel like poems need to add to the conversation, not just tell you what you already know. And I didn't want to do that with this poem.
Yeah, well, it's a great example, as your poems always do, and full of great metaphors and imagery too. Do you want to go ahead and read this poem, today's poem?
Yes. Baby of brain dead woman delivered in Georgia. Don't tell me it's a miracle. The woman's mind is gone. A plate God's licked clean. I can't stop thinking about her mother. How lightly she likely once held her little finger under the tap so the splinter could swim out like a fish. How heavy her arms must have felt on the nights she carried her from the car, still asleep. She had to, for months, watch her belly swell like a corpse. She wanted her in the earth where the naked alphabet of worms would spell peace, 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 and the leaves could lie upon her like freckles. Let it be done to me. That's what Mary said to the angel, as if life begins at reception, and rightness is a hard rain that kisses every crack till it gives.
Yeah, beautiful poem, and what a great way to capture the pain and heartbreak of that story. Lexi, thanks so much for sharing that poem today and for participating in Poet Respond. I always appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And once again, that was Lexi Pelle. And that's today's poem at Poets Respond on Rattle.com. If you'd like to submit your own poems about current events, anything that's happening right now in the last week from when you wrote the poem, submit it by Friday night at midnight. And then we pick one poem at least every Sunday for the daily poem. And of course, you can get the daily poem by subscribing to Rattle's daily poem email. All you have to do is go to rattle.com, go down to the very bottom, and sign up for our daily poem email too. And then we get poems like these, really powerful work. Also poems from back issues of the magazine, all sorts of things by subscribing to our daily poem email. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, John Poch. So sit tight and we'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is John Poch. John is the author of 7 collections of poems, including Poems, a finalist for the Penn Osterweil Prize, Two Men Fighting with a Knife, winner of the Donald Justice Award, and Fixed Quiet, winner of the 2014 New Criterion Poetry Prize. He's the founding editor of 32 Poems magazine, which is, to be honest, my favorite poetry magazine besides Rattle, and maybe including Rattle. He's the series editor of the Vassar Miller Poetry Prize, and he recently published a book of essays, God's Poems, The Beauty of Poetry and the Christian Imagination, and also a book of aphorisms on the practice of poetry, Notes on the Poet. He teaches at Grace College in Indiana, and here he is, John Poch. Hey, John, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to have you here. I've been a fan of your work and what you do for a long time, and there's so much variety to what you do, and 32 poems is one of the things that I really admire about that you've done. But there's such a wide variety to your work, so it's really cool to meet you and get to know you.
Thanks. Well, I admire the fact that you went 3 times as long with your magazine as I did with mine. Um, yeah, 30 years, that's a good run. 10 years, Deborah and I think we'd had enough at that point. But fortunately, George David Clark, whom you recently had on, he was willing to take it over for me, and he had his wife Elizabeth to work as the managing editor, and so both of them are just an amazing team. Things were at the time were shifting. There was a lot more online content. Uh, I guess it was about 15 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and they started taking over, doing stuff that Deborah and I just weren't equipped. We're kind of old school, just like words on the page, kind of just simply. We were trying to do as much as we could, but this new generation is just more apt at that kind of thing. So he's done a fantastic job continuing. We have a very similar aesthetic as well. I wanted the magazine to continue kind of in the same vein, so I was really happy that he was the one to take it over.
Yeah,
But
definitely. And that was about, I think it was last year, like a year and a half ago, maybe, that George David Clark was on. Definitely a great show to watch. Let's start out. I want to talk more about 32 poems and other things too, but let's start out reading one of your poems. Do you want to start with the first one you sent, Death?
yeah, This is this is from the first book, published back in 2004. Death. When I was born, everybody died. I never make my bed, and someone's always coming behind me, picking up. I'm a leader. I lost my keys to a tomb at noon. My footprint is a single black feather or a petal fallen from anything. Pick a color. A lover of formality, I'm black and white, black tie but barefoot and sloppy. When I'm on fire, I'm cold. The broken-legged lipizzaner in a ditch complains my name. I'm as slow as a spent bullet. I fear the mirror only. Bright tattoos of unremarkable people decorate my calves, and I strut down the beach like a famous wrestler who has practiced and practiced falling. Photography is my bag. I like hiding under the black cloth while everyone waits for an explosion. Prayer to my sinews is my idea of fun. I lie down as much as possible in a nest of bones till I feel guilty enough to get up and write an epitaph. I rhyme with breath. Everything my father did was a joke. My mother is a flute, a fluke. I've wanted to marry love for so long. She won't have me. When I die, everyone will live forever.
Yeah, beautiful poem. That's Death by John Poch. And John, as I understand it, you are one of the many poets who grew up going to church. And I was wondering, first off, how much that, listening to the Bible played into your love of poetry. Because it's one of those things I wonder, as fewer and fewer people go to church, how less we have a love for the music of speech, which is poetry, and how that music flowing through us is harder to sort of come across. And maybe that's why there are fewer readers of poetry now. So how much did that influence, do you think, your love of poetry?
Well, that was a huge influence on me. There's no doubt about it. The Bible, I guess when I was coming up, I mean, we were still, reading from the King James. So we were hearing, Renaissance poetry, pretty much every week when we were hearing the Bible preached. That's, the King's English, right? And so, not only the cadences of the scriptures themselves, but the cadence of preaching, of the songs that are sung in church services, all those definitely imprinted themselves on me, and just became, part of my, I guess, my songwriting. And I think early on when I decided I wanted to be a writer, and I wouldn't ever say poet. I just wanted to be a writer. I thought poet was too big of a calling or too weird of a calling to name myself a poet. Now I feel comfortable calling myself a poet. I published 8 books, so I should be able to, my eighth is coming out, so I should be able to call myself a poet. But early on, I felt like I couldn't write spiritual poems that were kind of biblical in nature. I wanted to write poems about my family, about nature, about the world as I understood it, and trying to, obviously, as most people, the reason they write is trying to understand who they themselves are. But I found out as I've gone along more and more, I felt more freedom to write about spiritual matters. And I think later on in the podcast, we can actually talk. Maybe I'll read a few of those poems. I'm writing, my plan is to write a poem for every book of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So 66 poems. That should be a pretty, pretty big book. Because, most of my poems are pretty short, a page. But I know some of them are going to go over that. So that's going to be I don't know. I think that's maybe more like a 5, 10 year project. I've gotten maybe 20 or 30 of those done over the past like 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit of a long-winded answer. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's just so much about the way, falling in love with the music and then being able to reproduce the music and create your own music is something that's so vital for any writer. Do you remember the first poem, though, that you wrote, or the first time you wrote something that surprised you and made you interested in your own writing? You know what I mean? Like there's those moments where you kind of catch the tail of the tiger or whatever it is, and you realize that you've got something more than you meant to go after. Do you remember the first time that happened and the way that that propelled you forward?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think I was kind of blinded by a kind of romantic view of poetry for a long time, which is fine. I think actually a lot of poets are that way, and um, there was nobody there really to stop me from that until I got to University of Florida and William Logan, um, kind of, you know, laid the boom down on me. Just letting me know it was just too emotional, too flowery. Um, I would say probably I really kind of got a little bit objective with my own work the second half of my second year at Florida. I was finishing up, I was getting into my thesis, and I just didn't have enough poems. I'm like, what am I going to do here? I've got to crank out some better stuff. I was starting to realize that the poems I'd written were just a little too fluffy. And I was in this argument with Logan, and I said, I want to write love poems. It's half the tradition. And he's like, well, here's a thing by Justice, here's a thing by Wilbur, here's something by Heaney. Gave me a few poems here and there that I could model on. And at that point, I was like, okay, I could see what they're doing. They're they're really interested in the language and in the craft and doing something particular. Um, and so I started, I don't know, it just somehow caught on and my poems got better really quickly. And I was a finalist for the Yale series a few months later,
Mm-hmm.
which I think my classmates at Florida were a little astonished because during my time there, I was writing okay poems. I thought they were pretty good, but my poems just got much, much better.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that was the year that W.S. Merwin didn't pick a winner, and he said none are good enough, and so that kind of stunk. But in the end, looking back, it's for the best. That was 97 and my first book came out in 2004. It was a much, much better book
Mm-hmm.
by 2004. I'm pretty proud of my first book, Poems, um, because it took so long. Those poems really got gone over so many times.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're another poet too, who started out interested in sciences, and I wonder how much of that affects the way you approach poetry. Do you feel like it's a tool of inquiry in the same way, or maybe in a different way that scientific pursuits are?
Well, I think more mathematics, I think many people think that John Poch is a formalist poet, that I write only sonnets. Some guy once accused me online of like, I only wrote sonnets about fly fishing or something, um, which is ridiculous. I wish I only wrote sonnets about fly fishing. I'd have a whole bunch of them by now. But I love the sonnet. There's something very amazing about the 8/6 form kind of going down the page, or the 4/4/4/2, and then of course the iambic pentameter going horizontally across the line. And that tapestry of, the warp and the weft of those two things rhythmically, sonically, the rhymes coming together, whether they're in a Shakespearean pattern or, an Italian form or a mix of those two. There's a lot of mathematical play and dynamic quality. Bach was a mathematician of music,
Mm-hmm.
right? And of course, you can hardly get better than Bach. We haven't improved on music so much since then, and so I think my early studies and my proficiency with math, I have an associate's degree in physics. So my first 2 years were at Clayton State College, south of Atlanta. I had a full scholarship, and so I was just like, well, I guess I'll just go there. I'm a first generation college student, so I didn't really know what I was doing. I think probably could have gone to a much better school if I would have had a better high school counselor, but I was pretty dumb, so I was just like, oh, I'll just go right here. And but I was really good at math, and I did well in my physics and my chemistry. But I think I bring that. I think I have this sense of a mathematical design, or at least a formal design, like a really measurable thing that I see in the craft of a poem. I hope it's also invested with a great deal of imaginative experimentation.
Hmm.
Like a good scientist, isn't just in the lab with just doing the same test tube stuff over and over, but trying to find something that nobody else has found. And so I think it's a combination of those two things that has kind of gotten me anywhere if I've gotten anywhere. I also write a lot of free verse poems, probably just as much. I think some people get in this thing where it's like a religion. You either have to be, you've got to reject traditional forms because that's conservatism, as if it's politically conservative to write a traditional sonnet, which is ridiculous. Or the other thing that you can only write like strict rhyming things that just don't break the iamb. And I like to go back and forth between things and even write prose as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear the next poem up. April's next. John, you want to read that?
April. Here we go. Yeah, and this is a Curdle sonnet, a poem Gerard Manley Hopkins invented. April, the month of resurrection, but of death, of lilacs over graves, the purple toes both hyacinth and frostbite kiss. Your dayquil helps your flu, you think, but then your breath collapses, the ventilator breathes, but all goes south like winter geese. A folding table folded. Approaching May or might, cold cruels and kills the apricots you thought were close to turning. The sky dumps out its iron ladle. So what time is it when we suffer, fools? April.
That's a great. That's April. Kurtz's sonnet, and as you mentioned, invented by Gerald Manley Hopkins. And talking about mathematical poems, I mean, I don't even understand the form honestly of a curtailed sonnet. It's some way of like dividing a regular sonnet up using what is it? Is it the golden ratio? How does it? How did it divide up a sonnet? I can't remember.
I'm not sure. It's kind of like three-quarters of a sonnet, basically.
Hmm.
Hopkins was so intense in his sonnet writing, and it's just amazing to me. And this is the kind of imagination that I want to strive for, is that you're so good at writing the most intense sonnet that's ever been written. And then you say, okay, I'm going to jam pack it into a form that's three-quarters, the size and do the same thing, right? It's kind of like gunpowder, jamming it down into, a tighter space. You're just going to get a more powerful explosion.
Hmm.
And he did it. It's just astonishing. And so I have a great affection for the form. In my book, Two Men Fighting with a Knife, I've got a series of 13 sonnets about ghost towns that are in that same form. And then I think in my book, Fixed Quiet, there's a bunch of them.
Hmm. Well, I'm more curious in exploring this idea of poetry being kind of math. I mean, I have some mathematician friends. They say poetry is or math is the language of the universe. And um, Katie says poetry is the language of the sublime. And so, how do
Yeah.
those two cross? Like, where is the bridge between the language of the sublime and the language of the universe? There's a way, obviously, when talking about rhyme and meter, there's a measure to that. And there's the way that rhymes sort of slightly alter the expectation of what came before. So there's a mathematical movement in that you could maybe even like, maybe AI could come up with some formula for the way,
Oh
rhymes
God.
move through
I hope
poems,
not.
or some kind of way to chart it. But what is that relationship? I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
I think Katie's right. I mean, if we're going to take the universe as the physical universe, right? That there's a mathematics to that runs everything. gravity, space, time, all the measurements. Um, but there's a spiritual world underneath it. I believe as a Christian, other people believe who are believers in other religions, that there's a spiritual dimension beyond this life, this physical world. And I think poetry is the thing that gets us to that other world. I mean, it's a matter of um, the word itself, right? In poetry, and the word sublime, right, is uh, below the liminal, right? So subliminal. So I think sometimes we think sublime is up, but actually sublime is down. It's below the surface. It's this thing that is unseen in the way that kind of roots go down. It's something that's deep, right? And I think poetry, because of words, I believe that the world was created with words, right? If you go by Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that he spoke it into existence um, through the word. And to me, taking our words, lowercase w, back in the other direction gets us a glimpse back into paradise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the sublime that I'd like to talk to Katie about this. Maybe we can have dinner together sometime and have a bigger discussion about that.
Yeah, well, that'd definitely be fun. And so to get to that space, to find that deeper, truer, whatever truth is, it's more than just the surface details of something. And to get to that, it seems like it requires some kind of meditative space where you're really focused on, I don't know, not being yourself and being something other. Like that surface self disappears, and that's what allows the art to flourish. And I'm always really, fascinated about the way that corresponds with sort of the voice of God in the sense of prayer, and how losing the self is the sort of spiritual journey, and then we're losing ourselves while we're making poems or making any kind of art anytime that we're doing it, And so what is that? Do you feel that meditative state when you're writing? And is that something that you pursue? And how do you get there?
Honestly, no. You know, um, to me, it's just like work, just like anybody, like building a house or, I don't know, cleaning teeth or selling, cell phones. Um, Hopefully, people love their jobs, they love what they do. Um, I don't think I don't feel like I don't want to get into some state where I'm not conscious of what I'm doing.
Mm.
I want to be very thoughtful. Certainly that happens where like all of a sudden I walk out of my studio where I've been working and 4 hours has passed and I thought it was like 10 minutes. I've been working on a poem and yeah, I have kind of gotten lost in it. But that's not something I seek out
Hmm.
at all. I kind of want to be aware of what I'm doing as much as possible. Back to this idea of kind of like the work of writing poems and what we were talking about math earlier. Donald Hall calls a poem a language machine. And I really think of a poem very much in the making of this is in the way that a mechanic would put together a carburetor, an engine block, and the pistons, manifold, exhaust, all the other stuff that makes this thing move, right?
Hmm.
And a poem very much is this thing that makes us move, that moves us as readers. And I want to make sure that I've got the parts kind of aligned, the verbs, the metaphor, the assonance, the rhyme, the meter, all the stuff that makes up a poem, or all those different parts put together and tinkering around under the hood, and hopefully coming out with something that runs a little smoother, runs a little faster, is a little bit, more stylish, right? Um, so yeah, that's my answer to the question.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting because so often we hear the opposite. So, and there's a way there's an honesty to that because there is so much work that goes into poetry, and you can tell there's so much skill to learn, so much knowledge to have. You can tell where a poem's going wrong, what's missing, and what it needs that it doesn't have yet. And I think sometimes we get lost in the that broader vision of what's going on, and we don't want to admit that there's so much technical detail going on too at the same time.
Yeah, I'm interested. Like when I read poems for pleasure, other people's poems, as a poet myself, I'm very interested in knowing why that poem moved me, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
how does that image work? Like sometimes I'll just be flabbergasted, and sometimes I'll just kind of revel in the feeling of it. I can remember when I first fell into poetry, there was a poet named Charlie Smith, um, who also writes novels. He's published by Norton. Hardly anybody knows about him. He's an astonishingly good poet. His first couple of books are just amazing. If I want to get inspired, I go back to the Charlie Smith. But I remember I was in Oxford Books in Atlanta. That bookstore no longer exists, but back in 1987, it was like the big bookstore. But this is before Barnes and Noble had kind of ruined the world. And I just came across his book. A friend of mine had told me about Charlie Smith. I should read Charlie Smith. So I was reading. I think I opened up I don't know if it was the book itself or if it was in a magazine, probably in his book. And I read this poem of his, My Parents' Wedding, and the last two lines just blew the top of my head off. I was like, I just went out into my car and I just sat without buying the book. I just went out to the car and I just sat there. And I think that's probably one of the moments when I knew I wanted to be a poet.
Mm-hmm.
I was so moved by the language of that poem, and I said, I want to do that. And so later on, I went back to the poem, and I just said, how does he do this? And of course, he just has these gorgeous metaphors. It's just metaphor after amazing metaphor after metaphor, but also this very luscious Southern sound to his poems, and yeah, hopefully I can do that for somebody else. I don't know. Again, it's so hard to be objective with your own work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I want to pick up on that again, but let's hear another poem first because I want to make sure we get to all of them. Let's do rock and roll next.
Okay, this is one of the poems from what will eventually, hopefully, be a book of poems for every book of the Bible. I'm thinking of calling it the Bible, just to upset some people. Us poets are rebels. King David was a rebel. I was actually thinking about David. And this poem probably will be the poem that will stand in for the Book of Psalms. I was thinking about, and it actually might be actually First Samuel, because that actually is the narrative of David's life,
Mm-hmm.
right? It appears in First Samuel. Um, I was thinking about, gosh, what would it have been like for David to have composed one of these amazing Psalms? I mean, the Psalms are just absolutely mind-blowing, extraordinary. I don't know the Hebrew, but in the King James English, they're amazing. And so this poem kind of happened out of me just kind of meditating on like I usually don't start with an idea to write a poem, but this poem really came out of an idea of thinking of like what would it be like for him and his struggles. He went through some real difficult terror in his life. And also, I thought of him being, a songwriter, from the get-go. He's out in the fields with his sheep from a very young person. How do you entertain yourself? I'm sure he had an instrument out there. He's writing songs. But also, and so later on when he comes into King Saul's court, you know, Jonathan, I think, sets him up with this gig probably and says, "Hey, here's this guy. He writes these amazing songs." And so, of course, it's not long before Saul's trying to kill him. But rock and roll. King David strumming the gut strings, gutting the silence of the temple dust and air, improvises on his instrument, looking for the riff, the new tune, and outside a literal storm flashing, falling toward and on Jerusalem. the steady drumming of his heart, and right foot rock along, harmonic, bass lines thundering substance under all. What's the matter? Always only a step between a doorway and death, dodging a spear of near silence, the trouble with bears and lions, so many enemies of even the thought of God, a trickling brook of smoothest stones, the inordinate bones of giants, and still and low, the loneliness of fields and sheep. At some point, everyone's got a good friend dead and a clock to talk to. More than some symbolic robe, hood pulled over his head like a cave where he can hide, David looks in the dark for that kingdom chord, the name of an angel thick as a hand in honey coming from the heights to touch his tongue. He conjures up a rhythm to change the light in a room where women might swoon and men would bend their boredom to a leap of faith in air like hunger personified. And with the marble thunder dissipating, here he's humble again among the petrichor, the smell of wet wolves in the corridors, and invisible snakes of the rain, unsettled, now settling with the storm already past. A clear shining coming on through firelight. He's looking. He's looking for a line. Deliver my darling from the power of the dog.
And that was Rock and Roll by John Poch from a forthcoming book. You mentioned, John, reading poems and wanting to know how they work. And there's an interesting thing that implies, the way that we approach poems as poets. Because I do the same thing. I love to pick poems apart and see, like, why did this move me so much? Like, what were the strokes that, like Lee Young Lee did to pull that off? Like, the certain things that he did, the way he created that image and then repeated this line, and, how did that work? And do you think is that one of the reasons why we don't have as many readers of poetry? Because one of the things we always come back to is the fact there's not a huge audience for this, even though it's so amazing. Like, we love it. Is there a way that we focus so much on that craft aspect of how things work that we sort of forget that, poets, everybody's reading poetry is sort of reading as a poet, and yet there's this whole world of people who can't read it as a poet because they're not poets yet, Right. And then there's a way that almost like when we're writing, we're trying to work to convert people to poetry, So there's that aspect of it too, where if you write a poem that's wonderful, then the reader's response is to want to write a poem back and add to that dialogue too. And so sort of one by one, we're converting poets at the same time, but then we get more and more poets. And, so there's a whole economy that doesn't really work on the one hand. And I don't know, just what do you think about the state of poetry right now? Because you've done a lot, you've tried many different ways of publishing books, and you started a literary magazine. What do you think the place for poetry is in American culture or world culture? Why isn't it larger? Is there a solution to that problem?
Yeah. You have to read my book Notes on the Poet. That's an opportunity to pitch my book if you want to know what I think about poetry. William Logan said the state of poetry is North Dakota, which I think is very, very true. Hardly anybody's been there. We kind of think we know where it is, but that's the state of poetry, North Dakota. I say this thing, most people just don't need poetry. They don't want it until somebody dies. Then you need it because regular words just won't suffice, right? What's just happened till somebody close to you dies, right? And then all of a sudden you need some special words because the words of this world that make the prose that makes everything work. Prose no longer works. That person isn't in space and time anymore. So this narrative structure is just not going to do it. You got to have something else. And I think then people reach for the poem. They'll reach for scripture, which is poetry, or they'll reach for poetry. And I think early on, I've always been so passionate about poetry myself, but I've just realized very much, from reading a lot of Auden, a lot of his criticism and his prose, it's kind of silly. I mean, people just don't want it, you know. Like a few of us do. We really want it in the way that very few people want ballet, right? As a dance thing. People want to go to the club and they want to dance around and and do the most recent moves stolen from Fortnite or whatever. Um, and but they're not interested in ballet, even though they know that ballet is probably the most technically beautiful thing. But it's too hard. And I do think poetry, really, really good poetry, is probably too hard for most people. We want it to be easy, but the really good stuff that we come back to again and again and again has such complications in it and has a link with tradition, right?
Hmm.
That, I mean, think most people reading, T.S. Eliot, they're just not going to get most of it because they haven't read their Dante, they haven't read their Bible, they don't know Wagner, they haven't read Shakespeare, all the other stuff. They might latch onto an image or two here and there. I would say the same thing with Plath. You can appreciate certain things on the surface level. You can appreciate the Gothic, the startling Gothic, powerful feminine voice in her poems. But what she's doing with language, with form, with structure, with that's connected down the tradition to all these other poets, from Dickinson to Milton to Donne to Herbert to Shakespeare, on and on, all the way back to Sappho. I think, well, and Dante, right? The kind of hell world that we get into with Sylvia Plath, I think maybe wouldn't exist without Dante. And so I just think most people aren't prepared for that kind of thing, right? Kids are taught in school, they're mistaught that a poem means a thing. What's the meaning of this poem? As if there's like one meaning. And I'm always preaching against that there is no meaning to a poem. And for some people, it's a relief uh, that there are many interpretations of what's going on in the poem. Every line has a multitude of meaning, right?
Hmm.
But I think that I've gone on so many tangents here. I'll pull it back. I'll pull it all back in. I think that the misteaching of poems as this kind of emotional experience, like just kind of this romantic Wordsworthian expression of feeling, uh, makes people like only their own poetry or poetry that they can identify with or relate to, that thing of relatability, which I think I was watching the William Logan podcast that you did, and he kind of gets onto that, it doesn't matter whether we can relate to a poem or not. I can read a poem by Anthony Hecht about World War II, you know, and the nightmare of the Holocaust, right? I can't relate to that. I will
Hmm.
never relate to that, but I can recognize in it one of the most beautiful poems of the 20th century.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, it seems
And
like the point
yeah,
is to understand experiences that you don't relate to. Because we are,
absolutely.
as human beings, we're so individually idiosyncratic and strange, and our perspective is skewed and limited. So many biases and so many models that are just wrong that we see the world through. And then something breaks through that, which is someone else's point of view. And so the fact that you
Yes.
can't relate, like, should be that I want poems I can't relate to. And then
Yes.
that's what broadens my experience of life. And it's not poems that I can that repeat the same thing that I already know. So that's my feeling on this
Yes.
subject.
No, that's 100%. All teachers of poetry should be teaching this. Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure we get through all the poems. Let's do Belief at Cherry Creek next.
Okay. Yeah, I moved to Indiana from Texas a few years ago, and there's a creek, there's a big lake right next to my house, Winona Lake. And there's a creek, the bigger creek that flows into it is called Cherry Creek. And, having lived in West Texas where there's no moving water for hours, just the high plains. and the drought and the heat, and getting to a place where every day I have access to moving water. It's just a miracle to me to watch it flowing, and I'll go out there and I'll walk this trail and I just come across the creek, and it's one of the most beautiful blessings of my life right now to be able to do that. And I guess this is my poem trying to capture what that means. Belief at Cherry Creek. Here it stirs a clarity like a spring along a stream, feeding what already goes, but now goes more. In the night, the water moves as the path of a silver deer's hunger awakens to the blithe safety of dream drifting and grazing. By day, the surface shines white, gold, reflecting green and brown, with wren song turning trees into water, where the water passes the trees in beds of grasses where the deer lie down. The spirit moves my blood to my heart in the same way the water winds its want song to an end that is not an end. The sky makes a lake cerulean where a peace comes to rest like a migrating swan or two swans. You and me, O Lord. Your wing is on my wing. Your white is my white. As in a great city of words, we are in an intimate room high above the world where we can read a book together. Read to me through your infinite throat, for I want you and your invisible sense of time, a clear watch face of your gaze, as if we are the flash of catchlight on the pupil of an eye that gives a look dimension. Maybe the other swan is more than my reflection. When I read, I look down to look up and let God be God.
Yeah, great explanation there. That was Belief at Cherry Creek by John Poch. So one of the things to spread poetry as much as possible. I take it you want to write poems that last. Like that's your goal, it would seem, and that's why working so hard, like a mechanic under the hood, making a amazingly performing sports car. You want to be an object that people want to keep and save. And would you say that that's your goal, is to write, a single poem or a dozen poems that last centuries? Is that what you have in mind?
Absolutely. I would love to be part of the tradition. I mean, like Dante, when he's in limbo and he sees the other poets that are gathered and he writes himself into the group, right? I became sixth in their company. Um, you know, um, yeah, you want to be part of the pantheon of poets. I don't know if I can, but I would like to. I think a lot of poets don't want to.
Hmm.
They don't care about tradition. Um, they just don't. They might give lip service to it, but they don't
Hmm.
read enough. They don't study enough. And you don't have to go into a program, an MFA program or PhD program to do that. You could totally do that on your own. There's, good Lord, with the internet, the resources, people just listening to your podcast, all the episodes, they would gain a wealth of information. Um, but I think a lot of people just want to hear the sound of their own voice,
Hmm.
and maybe their friends, their generation. I feel like most contemporary poets haven't read much past Jory Graham, and not even her early poems. Like I just don't think they've read like before the 80s. Like everything else is just ancient to them.
Hmm.
And there's an amazing tradition that's been passed down to us. When I first, before I even knew I wanted to be a poet, when I was still doing my engineering studies, I took a class at Clayton State College, an art appreciation class with Dr. David Ludley, who was an amazing English teacher. He changed my life in this art history class. And this is back in the day when you had a carousel with slides and you just go from one slide to the other. We went from neoclassicism up until present day. to modern art, George O'Keeffe and the action painters and even and op art and pop art and whatever was going on in the 80s. I think like Robert Longo and Anselm Kiefer were people that were just kind of emerging as the real big, Cindy Sherman, the next really big ones. And just kind of like seeing the movements of poets that they would look back at the previous generation and say, okay, we want to do that, but we want to take a next step further. We want to do this, take the next step further. Some would reach back a little bit further and say, grab something from Dada and bring it up to present, or go back to neoclassicism and do something with the line, you know. Um, when I started writing poetry, I was like, yeah, I wanted to have this sense of it going back through all these different movements, and I want to get the best of all that I like. Not that one is better than the other, but I definitely have my likes and my dislikes among those. And I just want to bring that stuff forward,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess for poetry, for the different movements, with the moderns, I mean, I love Stevens and Eliot and Crane and Moore, and then, moving past that to Auden and Larkin, and then Bishop and Plath and Lowell, and the next generation of Wilbur and Hecht and Merwin and just on and on, all the way up, you know, through I guess the meditative poets of the 80s when I was writing, when I first started to write, it was like Jory Graham and Robert Hass and Sharon Olds and Yusuf Komunyakaa. I was like, well, where do I fit? What can I take forward here to create my own way? And I feel like maybe I veer off in a lot of different directions, and I'm not sure. I don't have a more unified body of work, I think. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe by the end I will. I would love to put together a selected in the next few years in which I could say, okay, this is who I think John Poch is. These are the poems that I think, there's some poems I go back and I just kind of cringe at, of course. Just like, how'd this get into this book? Why did I do this? Um, but I think, in general, I've had pretty good editors help me, you know, curate the books. And I remember David Yezi when I was putting together Fixed Quiet. It had already won the prize, but he's like, John, too many villanelles. Nobody can write good villanelles, and you can't either. And so I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I changed a few of the villanelles to a sonnet, which is actually a very fun exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you go from 19 to 14. So basically, and you've already got a lot of rhyming structure, right? And you just get rid of the repeated lines. So you just need to get maybe 5 more lines in there. You just move stuff around. That's a fun exercise for your readers to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Turn
we
a,
should do that
write a
sometime.
villanelle and turn it
And
into
then
a
turn it into a
sonnet.
sonnet. Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to pick up that thread you mentioned. Because the truth is that I like to pretend that this is not the case. But the more you go out sort of into the poetry world, there's just so much BS. Like there's a lot of just I don't know, empty talk about things. And a lot of, I don't know, is it the careerism? Is it the academic ladder? And the networking that's so important. But the times when you see, like you come across certain people who are really passionate about poetry and they stand out so much. Like they actually love it. They love to read it. They love the history of it. They love adding to it. They want their poems to last forever, like you said. And then the fact is most people you come across aren't like that. And,
Yeah.
I imagine, it's sad to say, but I imagine so many people, got a pat on the back when they were little. They were like their teacher liked a poem once and they like that feeling. And they just want to get more of those pats on the back. And they don't actually
Yep.
care about doing anything deeper. And do you think, and then they fit into an academic world in which they're vying for job posts and moving around and those rare tenure track jobs and getting the degrees and working I hate, poetry magazine publication being like a notch in the bedpost. It's a credit, and I've got credits here and here and here.
Yeah.
And that's that's just the standard way of thinking about it, which is just so empty of actual poetry. So
Yeah.
do you think, why do you think that is? Is it academia? Would we be better off if we didn't have academia propping up poetry and haven't for the last 80 years or whatever?
No, I like academia. It's done me pretty well, given me a career where I don't know, there are poets out there that do other stuff, that have jobs doing other things and they do it well, but I just wanted to talk about poetry and be around it all the time. There wasn't really anything else that I wanted to do, and I found out that you could do that. I got lucky because I got a good job. You know, I got the Colgate Fellowship, which was the first year that they offered it, which was absolutely bizarre. I feel that was a gift from God because I'm sure there were other people that deserved it more than me. That was 2000. And then 2001, I got my job at Texas Tech, and tenure track job. I actually had several offers, but that was at a R1 university. And so I went down there and helped to kind of build a new program. Um, and I think, people say, well, should you go to an MFA program? It's pretty cool to like spend 2 years of your life. And now MFA programs are like 3 years, right? You
Hmm.
spend 3 years of your life writing poems and reading poems intensely. Um, if you can get paid, not charge tuition, and get a stipend and learn to teach, get some teaching practice, it's those are not wasted years. You're probably not going to get a job in academia, especially now. It's just there's so many MFA programs. There's way too much competition. You better be. I tell my students that want to go into graduate school, I was like, you better be multitasking. You better be developing an array of skills, learning technical writing, publishing skills, editing skills. Have a side thing where you're like, I don't know, learning business, because it's unlikely that you're gonna get a job in academia. Now, back to the idea of whether academia is like, I think poetry's kind of always been the same in a way, honestly, Tim. It's like there's been just a small group of people that are writing the really good poems, and there's a whole bunch of people that are writing okay poems. You know, they're right, and there's even more people that are writing really bad poems. And that's the thing though that people, I would say the bigger problem is not, it's not academia, it's people that can't take criticism. And everybody now, as you said, they want the pat on the back, they want only the encouragement. When I went to school, I wanted people to tell me, they were like saying, "Oh, this is really interesting. Uh, this is wonderful." They give me just kind of vague praise. "Oh, nice imagery." It's like, no, tell me what's wrong with it. And of course, luckily I ended up at Florida with William Logan because he was someone who was willing to tell me what was wrong with my
Hmm.
poems. I mean, he's more generous with his students than he is with people that he's reviewing. And kind and encouraging. But I will say that um, people just, most poets, they won't abide any criticism. And in today's world of identity, people are coming into poetry with like, well, I have to, like, it's their first statement in their bio is just like who they are, you know, whatever picture of their identity that makes them, interesting, and on the margins, on the fringes, then that's up first. And you can't mess with that. And oftentimes people are writing about that in their poems. And so if you criticize the poem, and I'm just like, maybe I'm criticizing the grammar, it's an attack upon them. And I saw this more and more and more, um, through the years that I've been teaching. And it's really wearying. And in some ways, now that I'm at Grace College, it's very refreshing to be teaching undergraduates, I will say,
Hmm.
um, because they're very open and they're very hungry in a way that I feel like most graduate students are not. They're hungry for something else, that I apparently just don't have.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, there's definitely strains of poetry, and there's a way that I don't know. I mean, one strain is poetry as a political tool, and then
That's a problem.
hmm
That's a problem. Yeah. So I say this thing, and Yeats was not wrong. Yeats was right. He said, of our quarrel with others, we make rhetoric, and of our quarrel with ourselves, we make poetry. When you have a political point you're trying to prove, there's no quarrel with the self, right? That's a quarrel with others. It's rhetoric. And of course, you can have rhetoric in poetry, but put it in the scales. Is the rhetoric outweighing the poetry? Yeah, most of the time in contemporary poetry, almost everything in Poetry Magazine these days, um, and not to rag on them, but everybody knows it. I mean, it's just like this just blatant, just kind of political thing that's going on. There's very little aesthetic beauty in anything that they're publishing, and I'm just not interested in that.
yeah. Well, I mean, I gotta admit, I stopped reading it too. So what can you do?
Yeah.
We got to read more poems of yours, though, John. Let's do. And I should say too, if anybody has any questions for John Poch, I'll leave them in the chat windows either on Facebook or YouTube, and I'll pass them along. Also, if you haven't yet and you're enjoying this conversation, please click the like button. If you haven't, we always have like twice as many people watching live as have clicked like so far. And when I say that, that number jumps up to like 75%, and then the algorithms love us. So please do click the like button if you haven't yet. But let's hear this next poem, John. Next up was The Man and the Woman, a prose poem, which we interestingly, given we've seen form before.
Yeah, so I'll say something about this one. I love Lydia Davis. And I think this is maybe inspired by Lydia Davis and the way that she does a kind of Mobius strip, like turning back on itself again and again and again, and somehow ends up, making this kind of Escher-like drawing that is just absolutely marvelous. So hopefully I come close to what she does. The Man and the Woman. I love you, said the woman. Same, said the man. It's not the same, said the woman, because you didn't say you love me. It is the same, said the man, because with the same creative force in which you said you love me, I said same. You can't measure my creative force, said the woman. And love can never be equal. That's the awful thing about love. But you've had my children, said the man, and I have with these hands measured our children with pencils in the white door frames of our house, and I love you. When you say it now in this way, it's a cliche, said the woman. I can't win, said the man. Aha, said the woman. In love, you're supposed to lose. Then it's obvious I love you, said the man.
That was The Man and the Woman by John Poch. Let's see, John. I wanted to ask one about other things you've done to publish poetry, because as most of us know, poetry books don't sell very many copies, and that's another problem that we're all trying to deal with, is how to get, you want your poems to last forever and be part of the big dialogue over time, and how do we do it when that there's so much competition for presses, and then the small presses have so few readers. And then you've done some interesting things with NFTs. You kickstarted a book. So you've done sort of thinking outside the box. What do you see publishing moving forward? Because it feels to me like the traditional publishing model is completely broken in a way that is just obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
the average small press book. I mean, most poets publish on a small press, unless you're on university curricula. So you're on the syllabi, and students are forced to buy your books. You're only going to sell the 100 copies, a couple hundred copies. From a small press, mostly to friends and family, and it's your own readings and your own marketing. and so how do we get beyond that and outside of that to make poetry that lasts when there's so much sort of dilution? And you've tried, dip your toes in other things. What do you think about the way publishing is going to be moving forward? Is this the old model that we've had for the last 100 years going to keep working? Or do you think we're going to all have to branch out?
It's pretty depressing. It really is. Maybe you can answer this question. I'll ask you a question. Like, why, when you go to, say, a fiction reading and a poetry reading, people be lined up to buy novels that they're going to read once? And then at the poetry table, you have two or three people. Like nobody's buying the poetry book. But the poetry book you would read again and again and again, if it's a good book, right? You might read a novel a second time, or maybe if it's Cormac McCarthy or somebody fantastic, Marilyn Robinson, then you're going to read it, 5, 10 times or something.
Hmm.
But I don't get that. Why is that? Why do people at poetry readings just not buy poetry books?
Hmm. And it's even worse than that because talking about readings at a bookstore, the poetry reading is more entertaining. I don't know how many times you've been to a prose reading of nonfiction or fiction, but unless it's like an amazing, like T.C. Boyle, I went to a reading that was amazing, but very rarely does it even hold your attention in the oral way. I mean,
Oh,
it's
right,
hard to sit
exactly.
through a reading, and yet it is. It's what people are lined up for. But I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, and I think it maybe goes down to what we were talking about before with the lack of criticism. The fakeness, the fakeness everywhere, the fakeness of blurbs. The way 20 years ago, I don't know if you know Dan Waver, he made this computer program called the Blurbinator, where you could like type in the text of any book and it would just spit out a blurb and you couldn't tell the difference. And that was before large language models. It was just a really simple algorithm to say, that he talks about this and this and this and the refreshing blah, blah, blah. It just all sounds the same. And we just all bullshit each other all the time. There's no, there's no real criticism. If you pick up a poetry book, you just don't know if it's going to be well written at all. And I think that's maybe the main problem. But I don't know. I mean,
I think it's a psychological thing. I
hmm
think people want poetry for free. They feel like they should get it for free, and they just don't want to. I did a reading in Denton, Texas, a long time ago, and I had some of my books for sale. I think it was like Two Men Fighting with a Knife had just come out or something. I'd won the Donald Justice Prize. I was hoping to sell a few copies, uh, and they had this reading at this bar. And it was a really cool bar. They served cool cocktails, and all the cool kids were there. It's Denton, Texas, which is a really cool town. A lot of great music comes out of there. And the room was packed. I think there were probably like, I don't know, 70, 100 people in this little bar. And I think I sold like two books. And everybody's drinking these $12 cocktails. And I think my books were like, I was just like, I just want to unload them for like $10, you know? And people are just going back for cocktail after. I'm like, that cocktail's gone. You can have my book. You know, nobody wanted to buy the poetry book. But I don't know. Maybe cocktail's better than my book of poems. But I think I spent a much greater deal of time on that than somebody shaking up a drink or something. Um, I think part of it is a psychological thing. But as far as the larger question of, what's the future of publishing? One thing I've been thinking about is that I think books need to be not just printed, but they need to be really well done from here on out in the future if you want them to do something. A lot of paperback books are coming out, just the thinnest paper. You can see the print on the other side. It's just kind of a disappointing look. They don't spend much time on the graphic design. It's like, I think we need to get back to letterpress printing. We need to get back to making like hardcover books, like cloth bound. We need some presses to like take this a little bit more seriously to create these artifacts that show, hey, we care. Like these are what's in these pages matters more because the way that we're caring for the physical aspect of it. It reminds me of like one time I went into I guess it was in uh, the art museum in Chicago, the Art Institute. I came across a Van Gogh painting. Is it? I think it's a self-portrait. There's a big old frame around it. The frame is like this, wide around the whole thing. And the painting is like just like this big. But I was like, man, a massive frame. That frame really makes the picture. You know, it just created value for, I know it's a Van Gogh and it would be amazing without that frame. But the frame really did that picture justice. And I think, maybe we need to, publish books a little bit better, but it's going the opposite direction. People just want to print and POD, so they aren't even doing a print run. They'll do a print run of maybe 40 and then every 10 that they might do, just to, minimal cost, instead of really believing in an author. I think my first book, Roger Lathbury or Kaiser Press printed too many. I think they got it wrong somehow and they printed like 1700, which that book is now out of print. I think I have the last like 40 or so copies of it. And, but I think it was like 1700 copies. But now I probably my most recent book, like Texas's, I think that I don't know what the numbers on are on the sales of that book, maybe 400 or something like that. Which a lot of people say, oh, that's good. It's like in a country of 300 million people, it's like,
Hmm.
or even it's called Texas's, right? It's like how many people are in Texas? Like I should have sold more than like 400 copies, but
Hmm.
you know, I mean. And I'm not just talking about my books because maybe my poems are no good, but like just anybody's books are kind of suffering this kind of inattention,
Hmm.
right? Now back to the idea of NFTs, I had a lot of hopes a few years back. It was like this new realm of publishing just kind of opened up in front of us. And being able to get poems onto the blockchain and attached to the blockchain, Katie herself, who is doing some of this work. I know you've had Sasha Stiles on and Ana Maria Caballero, um, who are really good poets, all three of them. The problem, I think, early on was that there were so many bad people, just anybody can put poems as NFTs and get them on there with all kinds of their bad ideas and bad art and everything. And and then you get also get overshadowed by big projects like Bored Apes and punks and this version of punks and that version of punks and um it was a fun world to be in. I was deeply in the NFT world for I don't know, probably 2 years before it all just went to zero.
Hmm.
And it hasn't all gone to zero. I think Sasha is still doing the good work, and I think Anna Maria is still doing the good work. I don't know what is Katie still is she still doing
Yeah, well,
NFT?
we're working on. We're published. We published a book of Hyben together on the
Okay.
blockchain through Alexandria Labs. Was a lot of fun, and I do think
Okay.
it's the future. Because the future is digital, and
Yes.
that's the way the world is going. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And then there's so many
It's
more
either digital
tools,
or
sort of beyond
it's
Amazon. It's like breaking the centralized power of a thing like Amazon, and the
yeah.
ability for that just as a tool. I think has a lot of merit and it still has a future, and so that's the main thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I,
anyway, we got to keep mowing on poems. We're sort of
okay.
over time. Let's do another poem. Let's do Light and Dark, another prose poem.
Okay. Light and dark. I like that the word light is powerful and yet so gentle, like a good man. While it might simply mean something that isn't heavy, it also always conquers the dark. But I stand corrected when I come to understand that black holes suck planets and asteroids and even stars made of nothing but gravity and light into their clutches and conquer the good, after all, like some satanic dream of justice. Still, we hope that the light isn't completely destroyed and will reappear in another dimension beyond a wormhole, its energy not dead, but traveling on and on to do the work of illumination and glory in eternity. We all know people who are metaphorical black holes. They suck the joy out of us that we are so happy to admit, like photons. They call themselves the light because, one, Lucifer, two, they think they are what they eat. Starlight, morning waffles, red meat, or men's souls, they want it all. If we hang around too long, before we know it, drawn in, we ourselves are turned inside out like a pair of pants in the hands of an evil seamstress whom we thought might merely help us with a hem. For her, we must maintain the disdain and calmness of martyrs. I wish I could be sucked into a black hole every time at a poetry reading when the poet reads dark poems and then says, these next ones will be a little lighter. And then everyone laughs along like we haven't heard the joke before. But I digress. It happens like this. One minute in the afternoon light, I'm writing a funny poem about a small mammal, but then I'm thinking about how we're mammals, and this one I know seems to want to do me in like a bear or a lion, me a man without even a stone within reach. It's only hyperbole, but I feel the hate like fur that you feel before the monstrous claws. It tickles a little. If it must be so, let it be the lion who asphyxiates its prey mercifully, rather than the bear who tears and tears and tears with such boredom, nearly sloth. Who wouldn't rather go into the dark quickly with power than that slow ripping around and around the inevitable like a piece of torn, disintegrating paper swirling toward the pipes that lead out to the sewer?
Yeah, another great prose poem that was light and dark. And what do you think? Going from we saw a curtail sonnet at first, and then moving into that prose poem. It's a longer one. What is the difference between a prose poem and why not lineate that one? And I mean, obviously, there's meter and formal poems, but why not a free verse poem? What makes it a prose poem?
You know, I was talking to Lydia Davis after reading, and I told her, she had just published a book. I think it was Samuel Johnson is Indignant, which is stories, right? And I said, after the reading, I said, those are poems. And she said, shh. And it's that thing, like, my books of stories will sell a lot more. If it's poems, they're not going to sell. Um, that's definitely not a story. That's a lyric for sure. But I want to push back against the line. I love the line. When I discovered the line in my first poetry class with David Bottoms, and he was talking about what lines do and jammets, I was like, oh, I'm in the presence of the holy. It's amazing. But you do that for a while, and then you get really formal, as Leon Stokesbury and Marvin Bell and William Logan taught me to write good, kind of formal, structured lines. But I feel like I've always written prose. I started actually writing short stories before I switched to study English, switched out of engineering. And I was writing these stories and sending them to the New Yorker and the Atlantic. And, not knowing, I was reading Tobias Wolff and Raymond Carver thinking, I can do this. And I found my stories getting shorter and shorter, and then I found the line. Um, but I still have an affection for fiction, and I have an affection for prose and well-wrought prose. And in the same way that Ezra Pound is like pointing people, he's like, poetry's gotten so bad. He's like, we need to look back to prose, like the prose of Henry James, and say poetry needs to be that good. And so I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the prose writers like Cormac McCarthy, as I mentioned before, like Tobias Wolff. You read a paragraph of Tobias Wolff and you are already in this other world of a story. And it's magical, right? And I feel like I want to participate in that, but on a really poetic level. And, Russell Edson, for Parnassus Review back in, I think it was 76 or 77, wrote this article about prose. What is prose poetry? And it's, I agree with about 95% of what he says in that. That prose is not the opposite of poetry. Prose is the opposite of verse, right? It's because the word prose actually comes from the Latin pro versa, right? And it means moving forward away from the line, which I th find fascinating, right? And so not being bound by the line, but letting the poetry go forward and away and just keep going. What happens when you're doing that? And so I want to like I have this book of prose poems or stories, whatever you want to call them, flash fictions. I'm messing around with that. I've been messing around with that for probably the past 10 years. Whenever I want to push back against the line that I'm writing in, I'll get into a groove and I'll write three or four of these.
Hmm.
I love the form. From Baudelaire to Lydia Davis, Mark Strand, James Tate, Russell Edson, um, I love what Victoria Chang did in Obit
Hmm.
with that kind of a prose poem. That's really interesting. And she's really good with lines, but she decided to push back, I think, against writing in lines in that way. And it really offered up something new and interesting.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, that's definitely a great explanation. I like that concept a lot. Let's see. So, a couple of threads we want to pick up on that have come up and everyone's talking about in the chat. So, first of all, on political poems, Dick Westheimer asked a question, and I guess in general, we're going to talk about like what is it possible to be political in a poem? Because we just threw political poetry under the bus. So, is Deaf
yeah.
Republic political poetry? To name a specific book, that's Dick Westheimer's question. And what do you think about that, Deaf Republic?
Well, I got into trouble because with that. I kind of got canceled. That was the first time I got canceled. And
Oh, how
even
many
by like,
times have you been canceled? I think I'm on
even,
four myself.
yeah, you and me, man, and I think a lot of others. But yeah, I didn't like that book very much. I thought it was silly. Of course, it won all kinds of awards and people praised it to no end. But Ilya Kaminsky, I just said something on Facebook like I thought was overrated. And I think I also threw in somebody else at the time. I won't even mention her name because they'll just drag up more problems for me. But, all of a sudden I was an ableist and a racist. I'm like, can't I just not like a poem, like poems? It has nothing to do with the people, it just has to do
Hmm.
with like, but you need to read this through like the lens of deafness or something. It's like, no, I need to read this through the lens of poetry, of what good poetry is. And that's just going to be, we're going to have to agree to disagree at some point, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that I have to read things through a certain lens. I'm going to read things through just what I know is the collective good poetry of stuff that's ever been written. And people say, well, what's good? Well, we're always determining that in what's a good hamburger or, what's a good movie. When it comes to poetry, well, you better not say what's good because all of a sudden you're a racist, right? But I mean that book isn't terrible.
Hmm.
But I thought there were so many I just kind of laughable moments in it. And I think it for me it tried to be overly serious and it didn't achieve the grandiosity that I think that it tried to lay claim to.
Hmm. Well, I'll say what
And
my opinion on Deaf Republic. I think actually it's a great book to bring up. It is probably literally the book I was anticipating the most of all poetry books in my adult life, because I love Ilya Kaminsky. I think he's such a genuine poet. He's an amazing person. Met him in
yeah,
person.
agreed.
Dancing in Odessa
Agreed.
is one of my favorite books, and so I
Yes.
read Deaf Republic's poems in poetry, some of the best poems in poetry magazine in a long time. I mean, the Deaf Republic poems that they published there were amazing. And I was looking forward to this incredible book that was going to be coming out. Like, literally, I have never anticipated a poetry. Maybe a Bob Hickok once, maybe. But rarely did I anticipate a book as much as that. And then I felt like it got lost in the politics. Like, I felt like there was an amazing sort of dystopian story that had so much emotional energy and depth to it, and then it fell into the political that we talk about in the bad way, which is just preaching the perspective of your sort of political identity, as opposed to following the strains and the threads of poetry. And so my recommendation to people is to go back and read Dancing in Odessa, because that didn't happen there. It's a beautiful, amazing book.
Yeah.
And Deaf Republic, I think, could have been. So it's something that I lament, actually.
Yeah. I remember, Jory, there was this thing in the New York Times about they asked a bunch of poets what they thought were like the most important books of the past few decades or whatever. Jory Graham mentioned Dennis Johnson's The Veil, and she talked about it as a response to looking back to criticizing the Reagan administration and Vietnam leading up to even all that and the politics, kind of right wing, um, kind of war driven politics. And I was shocked. I was like, oh, I never read that book that way. Like But then I was kind of illuminated by it. I was like, wow, like it does kind of work that way. And I thought that was pretty cool. I think maybe, try to cloak your poems a little bit more and not just be just so, I don't know, unsurprising, like I'm in agreement with a lot of the politics, but I want some interesting language,
Hmm.
right? I mean, like Ilya himself accused me of like being like a trumper, a Trump voter. It's like, and I've never voted for Donald Trump. And and I never will. It just seems to me like he's not a person that I would trust with anything. And I don't know. I don't get these attacks on people. You have to be able to not like poems. If people don't like my poems, that's fine. If they don't like my favorite poets, that's fine. If they don't like Sylvia Plath, or Elizabeth Bishop, that's fine. I think they're wrong, and I'd like to show them like what I like about it. But you know what? If they can show me that this is the stuff that they love and why they love it, go forth and be happy with it. We're all gonna have our favorite
Hmm.
stuff, at the end of the day. But this kind of like the cancel culture of just trying, because I think it's people get a little precious about poetry. It really hurts poetry.
Hmm.
Not to, again, not to be, and people are more, and I myself am much more reluctant. I had hopes of like writing a lot more reviews and criticism, and now I'm just like, I just have a distaste for the whole idea of it because, you know, I mean, William Logan he didn't care what anybody thinks. I probably shouldn't care either, but it starts to affect you and it affects your family. It affects just the way you feel, that people are calling you this or that. Um, so I don't know. I think, and to answer the question more straightforwardly, though, people should be writing political poems, you know. But the big thing is, I would say, go forth with Yeats's dictum in mind and say, what is my argument with myself about this issue? If you've already got it figured out, I don't know why you're writing about it. I think
Hmm.
a poem should always be this thing that is an investigation into something that you don't know, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
And
exactly. And that's what we try to
yeah.
get people to do with Poets Respond all the time, every week for the last 10 or 12 years or however long it's been, is to find, it's to find the thing that you don't quite understand, that doesn't quite make sense, that doesn't sit with you well, and then figure that out through the course of the poem, not just preach, what you know to be true deep in your heart. So, it's a very big difference. I'm going to go back to one other thing that people were talking about a lot in the comments is you mentioned it took a long time to call yourself a poet. And someone, it's way up at the top, I can't remember, said, now I'm more reluctant to call myself a poet because, think how
Oh,
seriously John takes it.
free.
But what do you think, when can you call yourself a poet? And I was thinking as we were talking, is the definition of poet, someone of the poet is somebody who would rather hear that their poem could be better than hear that it's good. Do you think that's a good definition of a poet?
Say that again.
A poet is someone who would rather hear that their poem could be better than that it's already good.
Yes. Poems can almost always be better. At some point, as the saying goes, your poems just have to be abandoned. They're never finished, just abandoned. They're gonna get as good as they're gonna get, but you should revise and revise and revise because it can always be just a little bit better. There can always be some little word shift, some line, some extra line, take away a line. Um, I like that. I think there's no one way to write. There's no one way to psychologize the way that you think about yourself as a poet. But that was just kind of like me not giving anybody advice. That was just the way that I felt. I just I thought it was just too weird to consider myself a poet. I mean, there are great poets like Auden and King David and Shakespeare. Like, am I a poet? Maybe I'm just like a writer. But after you do it for a while, it's like for me, I felt like I could call myself a poet and feel comfortable. I have actually a sweatshirt that I wear to all the basketball games here at Grace College. I'm kind of known for it around campus now. It says poet across it, and it's kind of based on a sweatshirt that my painter friend from New York, Todd Murphy, his red sweatshirt with the big letters that says life across it. And I was like, man, that's awesome. And so I was like, I want one of those, but I want it to say with the same number of letters, but have it say poet, on it. And so my nephew, who's in the Rock Band basement, has this kind of thing where he likes to sew on a sewing machine and make cool clothing and stuff. And he actually has his own line of clothing. He's a wild man. But he made me this sweatshirt. And so I am truly a poet, and I'm proud to be a poet. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Let's wrap it up. We're over time. Two
Okay.
poems left here, but which one do you want to close out with? Mermaid Tears or The Plaza of Good Success?
Let's do the Plaza of Good Success. It's it's a love poem for my wife. My next book is called Dark Cathedral. It's being published by Slant Books. It'll be out sometime at the end of this year. I don't have a date yet for it. Um, this poem actually was published in a completely different form, in which it was your voice, your voice, your voice, your voice. It was anaphoric all the way down. Like, I think maybe 30 times I say your voice. And one of my former students, Jasmine Bailey, who is an awesome poet and a great reader of poems, she said that it seemed out of place in the collection. She read my whole collection, and she said it's just she liked it, but it didn't fit. And so I rewrote it, and this is my new version of The Plaza of Good Success. Your voice is a poem on fire in a wire bird cage. It is the black water over which yesterday watches tomorrow, and the white water over which tomorrow watches yesterday. When you are quiet, the missing jewel of the finest pendant, the memory of your voice fills my hair with metal filings, and each church I pass is a magnet that loves arches. When I defend my love, it sleeps in my ear like the translucent egg of a wasp. Where you cry, the shadow of the aqueduct at noon shelters. Where you sing, we have a more than adequate aqueduct in which children are racing oranges. A 2-foot fountain falling on itself, your voice falls like a broken moth, rises like silver dust from a broken moth. Your night voice is the bulb, flower, and light. This is the timbre of the last page of a great book. You whisper promises, and the petals of the almond orchard shatter. Your words never fill my bones enough, and this is why I am dying. At once a naked girl waking, and a woman undressing for bed, you comfort boys and paralyze men with hushes. There is no in-between. The mother of worth, great with child, your feminine power is the god of waves when you say goodbye. Do you always hum while you mend torn nets near the ocean? Your voice doubts safety and saves us because your voice has big eyes. Your way of saying things with your hands in a room, angels with its muscles and feathers, because it is the angel of the sun who vacations at the center of the sun. We know it when we hear the echo of a woman singing with her eyes closed, who mops concrete steps in an alley while she thinks of her favorite chapel in a great cathedral. Praying, you silence the dark that calls itself the light. You like to say, the plaza of good success. There was a yellow-throated bird one warm winter long ago who sang to me in a park in Lisbon where we lay on a blanket outside a museum near a pond in sunlight while you were silent.
And that was John Poch reading The Plaza of Good Success. John, thanks so much for being a guest and chatting with me and getting to know you better. It's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to reading more of your notes on the poet, the criticism book. Yeah, all the aphorisms there. So everybody should check that out. Thanks again, John. Really great talking to you. And thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. I appreciate all that you had to say.
Thanks. Yeah. Yes, once again, that was John Poch. You can find his book, and lots more, go to measurepress.com for notes on the poet. All of his books are available all over the place. Texas, the God poems, the beauty of poetry, and the Christian imagination, if you're interested in that. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can find with John Poch, so do check that out. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our prompt lines. And the prompt for this week was to write a poem in which space is very important. Include a scent. So that's your prompt for this week. Write a poem in which your space is very important. Include a scent. Now, reminder, the poem should be 1 page max, but there should also be about 3 minutes max on camera. So if it's a long poem that fills up the whole page, make sure you just jump right in and get to it, not dilly-dally, because we want to get to everybody and not spend too much time. It gets to be late, especially on the East Coast. So share your poem. If you have a poem, email it to promptlines@rattle.com. That's promptlines@rattle.com, all one word. Then we can show it on the screen like we were showing John's poems before. And then find the Zoom link, which I'm about to deploy on Facebook and YouTube. And join us on the Zoom to share your poem, but only if you want to share a poem. If you want to enjoy them and just sit back and hear more poetry, the best place to do that is right where you are right now, because then you can see the poems too. So don't go on the Zoom unless you have one to share. But otherwise, sit tight and we'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. We've got our prompt poems editor, associate editor, my wife Katie Dozier here, live from the Pacific University low residency MFA program in Oregon. Hey, Katie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I feel like I'm reporting live from somewhere like on the scene, because it's like I am downtown and a large. First of all, I literally just saw someone I knew from up 3 stories and had to talk to them for a sec. So I'm enjoying downtown life.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a great place, and we talk about that program all the time because it is. I think I can't keep track of how many, but like 4 or 5 Rattle Poetry Prize winners have come out of that program. You know, Michael Mark went there for the short term one, and Craig Van Ruyen and Nancy Miller Gomez. There's so many great poets for that program, so I'm a little jealous that you get to be there. Well, we're manning the fort.
Well, I tell you all the gossip at least. So there's that.
There is that.
There's that. But I loved your conversation with John. That was absolutely fascinating. I love it when someone shows up and they're willing to talk about anything. So it's my favorite kind of person. So that was really fun to hear.
Yeah, well, definitely is. And it went on a little longer than probably should have, but it was really fun to talk.
It was worth canceling my dinner plans for.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
All right. Well, so the prompt for this week was write a poem in which space is very important, include a scent. So how did you tackle that one?
Okay, well, what was fun was that this one, I stepped on this idea, actually quite literally. I mean that, as you'll see. But I know some people were talking about in our Facebook group, having challenges with this kind of a prompt where there's like a million different ways to take it. And that's exactly what I'm trying to inspire is everybody to take it as creatively as possible because I think it makes the prompt line super fun. And then of course we learn a little bit more about you when we find out the direction you choose to take your poem in.
Mm-hmm.
So I should just go ahead and share it, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm so used to you pulling up the poem for me. That feels so weird at this point. Okay. All right. Why I left. Walking to the grocery store on a neighborhood sidewalk, more crack than concrete. There, in the shadows of shade, a perfect red spear, stem still attached, a boutonniere. It lay there, a cherry. And at once I imagined that jolt of fate or God or luck, how it must have sailed out of a white plastic bag, unmoored from its only purpose, the holy pleasure of giving pleasure, the Sunday topping scent melted, the red itself unread, now a pit instead.
Well, very interesting poem. Why I left, and that structure too. You've been playing a lot with form and shape lately, Katie.
Yeah.
When did you know you were doing that?
Well, I literally so I saw a cherry. So walking to the grocery store because I don't have a car here, which is kind of a fun like takes me back to high school and everything experience of itself. And then I saw a cherry on the sidewalk, and then because of the prompt, I realized that what is significant about this cherry on the ground is the space when you're used to seeing, a bushel of cherries, all cherries together, and how something by itself becomes wholly different. So I don't think that without the prompt, I don't think I would have seen it for what it actually was. So it was fun. And then I was playing with it a little bit because I didn't write it an hour ago. So I got to play around with it. I came up with the idea of trying to make the experience of seeing the word cherry, which looks so much like an actual cherry, give everyone the same sensation I had of just seeing one on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Well, very cool. I love it. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thanks.
And now, are you heading off to a next event?
Yeah, I'm late. Yeah, I'm late for dinner. So
Okay.
I'm literally, it's right across the street. Like I could almost see the restaurant and be like, "Hey, I'm here." But yeah, but I am gonna listen to everyone's later, and I'm excited. I'm really excited. I could see the group on here in the Zoom, and it's a solid group. I'm excited to see everyone's poems.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, me too. And we'll catch you later. I don't think, you won't be back by the time the show's over either. So I'll have to share your prompt for this
And I
week,
feel like
but
a
I will.
jerk because I'm the person leaving after reading, which is like the worst etiquette breach ever. So
Well,
I'm
we know
sorry.
you don't. We know you don't usually do that, so it's okay.
Okay, good. All right, I'll be back. All right, thank you.
All right. Well, bye. Great to see you. Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah. So that was Katie Dozier with her poem "Why I Left." Now for mine, this is where I went with it. One of those I didn't know what I was doing, and so I just jumped into the first image popped into my mind, and here it was, which is this. There. It's called "Making the Space." It was easy inventing the box. 6 sheets of plywood, the small math of their width added to each elongated cut. Of course, it took a table saw the size of Texas to get the lines straight. Brackets like buildings, sandpaper the weight of the Great Barrier Reef. Once inside, there was no inside. It felt more without than within. No sight, no scent, but a hint of the glue. The sounds of the world were a hum that added to the harmony, a note so low we knew it was there, but couldn't say how. If we could seal it ourselves, we would. That is the Making the Space, my poem for the prompt. And let's see what everybody else has. Let's go first to Rick Pongratz.
Hello,
Hey, Rick, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And you?
I'm great. Good to see you. So where did you take this prompt this week?
Well, I struggled with it for a while, and the first thing I came up with was the scent, so hence the title Skunked. And then I thought of my dog who has, anyway, I'll read the poem and you can all see what she does.
All right.
Skunked. Oh, you used to be such a good girl. At 2 months old, squirming behind my neck in the ominous first car ride, vomiting down my back. You've walked around me to pee in the heating vent so innocently. Oh, how you snuggle in close at night, quietly eating a hole in the drywall while I sleep. Dear, sweet border collie who, curled at my feet under the seat, chewed down the chair leg, who flopped into my lap to pee again as I sat cross-legged and meditating on the floor. Stay. I need you to be far away.
Beautiful ending there. Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah. That was
Thank you.
Skunked by Rick Pongratz. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Once again, Skunked by Rick Pongratz. Next, let's go to Jared Campbell.
Hello.
Hey, Jared. Great to see you. How you doing?
Good to see you. I'm doing good. Um, all right. So I've got a conversation at Black Dog Coffee House.
Okay.
When she told me she had quit, I was lost in what appeared to be a cloud. Do you know what clouds are made of? Imagination. Some would argue that a cloud is made of water droplets, but that would come as a surprise to the droplets. They didn't vote to form a cloud. They don't meet their neighbor droplets and discuss the things they have in common. They float in a state of nature. She wasn't clear on why, as if she sought an office emptied of its laws, a place where reasons stop, a space between condition and a cause. A person's not an office, but a person's not what's not her projects. The meaning of it all was lost between translation and its text. I said the thing about the clouds, but saying seemed to ossify the extra that gets added in the space between the artwork and the eye. Remembered coffee tastes like Instagram. The smell is what goes missing in the memory space between representation and the thing.
Well, fascinating poem, and another interesting form too, doing the prose poem and then breaking it out into quatrains. Yeah, very cool poem. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jared.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's Jared Campbell with a conversation at the Black Dog Coffee House. Next, let's go to, I think, a first-time caller, maybe Molly House.
Hi.
Hey, Molly, how you doing?
Good, thanks.
Have you been here before?
I have. And the
Okay.
last time I was here, you said, "Oh, I don't think you've been here before." And I said, "I have."
Okay. Well, it's an infrequent guest, but I'm
not
so
very
glad you could be
often.
here this week. Yeah. So what do you have to share with us?
This is called An Outdoor Shower is Barely There. Tacked onto a cabin's wall or tucked into an unused spot. It shouldn't be well made, its vibe provisional, creating an inside space surrounded by all the outside. All buildings create new interiors by carving up the out of doors, but an outdoor shower won't let you forget you're still outside, despite standing in your very own closet-sized space. It invites pretending, like a fort made of couch cushions and quilts, a tree house, a hiding place no one can see. There's never enough room to keep intended clothes dry, although you can hang them over the shower wall if it's low enough, and make like a movie seductress changing behind an ornate screen. A small thrill that never goes away, disrobing outdoors. Getting wet feels like skinny dipping. The water smells of nothing, wetness only, unless sun heat on weathered wood or slanty shadow has a scent. On the other hand, I smell the ocean in my hair, briny, alive, revived by the fresh deluge. The summery scent of sunscreen and sweat runs down my body and the drain. I enter the shower a part of the beach and exit a person, damp and dressed, covering miles in between.
Beautiful poem, and I love the way people are ending on rhyme too. There's really, really nice endings. Thanks so much for sharing that, Molly, and
Thank
glad you
you.
could be here. Yeah, and that was Molly House with An Outdoor Shower is Barely There. Yeah, I love the title too. All right. Next, let's go to Nivi next, and thanks for Dick for the heads up that Nivi was here. I want to make sure we get to her before she goes to go back to work. Hey, Nivi, how you doing?
Hello. Thank you. How about you?
I'm great. Good to see you. So, what do you have for us this week?
So I basically took this space to mean the kitchen, which is the heart of most houses now. It was back then. This was based on a memory that my grandmother told me
Hmm.
during one of the wars that happened here in India between India and Pakistan. So it's based on that. It's written sometime during the early 90s.
Hmm.
So that's what this is about. It's a short haiku.
Okay.
My grandmother keeps a transistor radio in her kitchen. Every morning, the news plays in bursts between rasam recipes. She never flinches at the headlines anymore. Today, the war is louder than mustard seeds. Smell of tamarind. Even war can't sour the broth.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that, Nivi. Both that last, the war is louder than mustard seeds, the leap there, and then a wonderful haiku too. Really like that, Ivan. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. There was Nivi de
Thank you.
Karthik
Have a good
with
one.
yeah, with what was it called, Nivi? Are you still there?
It's untitled. I still couldn't find a title good enough for it.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, okay, untitled so far. Let's think of a title for Nivi. Maybe we get some suggestions in the chat.
Yes,
All right.
please. I'd love that.
Great. Well, thanks, Nivi. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye. Yeah, it was Nivi de Karthik with a as of yet untitled Hyben. Let's go next. Let's go to a first-time caller. Well, hopefully, Ali Inam again. Well, hopefully I got it right this time.
Hello.
Hey, Ali, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I can't see. I can only hear you, but that's fine if you want to keep the camera off.
Yeah, my phone's camera isn't working, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Well, so glad you could join us. And where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Canada.
Oh, great. Well, glad to have you here. What have you got to share today?
So I also struggled with the prompt a little bit, but then I kind of decided I'd write a poem after E. Cummings. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, we love E. Cummings around here. Yeah, let's hear it.
One afternoon after E. Cummings. Tufts from the incense, rise rose, risen from the embers of the tips of the sticks in the grave mud of my grandmother.
Well, beautiful poem. I love the shape and structure of that. Thanks so much for sharing that, Ali.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely my pleasure. Hope you come back again soon. Yeah, that was Ali Anam with One Afternoon after E. Cummings. Let's go to Zachary Honeycutt.
Hey, Tim. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Zachary, great to see you.
Great to see you as well, Tim. I actually have a short one today, believe
Oh,
it or
wow.
not.
This is a rare short poem from Zachary Honeycutt. Always exciting.
The space between. The scent of you, so fine and fair, when you walk through the door in lime, is to me a breath of air, like sweet relief in my summertime. You and I lost track of time. Within our space, the clock held 3, and the world we knew became sublime, unordinary as our prior history, as fresh as crime before time to stew. The clock had to move, yet I think it knew.
Well, beautiful rhymes in that great form. Is there a word for that form? The sort of shortened sonnet?
That sounds like a good name to me. I haven't thought of it yet. I don't know. I just felt like writing a short one today, and that's what came out.
Well, very good. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Zachary.
Guys, see you guys next week.
Yeah, thanks. That was Zachary Honeycutt with The Space Between. Next up is Nate Jacob.
Good evening, Tim.
Hey, Nate. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Hey, I've got a longish one, so I'll get to reading it.
Great. Okay.
Titled A Constellation of Insomniac Thought. Every night out, she points to how the desert sky swaddles this flank of eternity, never empties, never fills, still it spills over its blackened brims. So many parts of us are the twinkling brightness that warms the wide divide of another's night awake. I tell her again, from the blunted point of my pencil, how I once let go too soon the soft clutch of my 10-year-old son's hand as we walked, and have never held it again. These many years later, she still pleads with me to take that hand back, to let Manus ducks be our new shared constellation, his grip my much improved, steady guiding light. But the boy is now 20, lives just out of sight. Time stretches everything to its breaking point. No one even bothers to challenge these rules, and so space stretches reason out too deep away until every tomorrow passes me by if I should sleep, replaced by never after and ever after dark matters. And certain stars from billions of light years away at last confess that they've been watching, that they finally see beauty in all of this, in us too. I would keep those stars and my sun forever in my view. Let the night sky swirl around my waking head's sway, right on through the lilac night. I'm not sleeping anyway.
Well, that's beautiful too. So many great lines in that, Nate. Really wonderful poem.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, it was Nate Jacob with a constellation of insomniac thought. Something I can relate to, speaking of relating, lots of sleepless times at night. Let's go next to Nancy Tennell.
Tim, the one I'll read is the second one.
Okay,
I
I'll pull it
sent.
up. Yeah.
Dressing for dinner. It's a Hyben. Nate suggested that I try a Hyben to get started on the prompt because I was struggling. So I did, and I came up with one.
Great. Let's hear.
This is also prompted by Katie's comment on the Poetry Space 104 when she said she wished people still dressed for dinner. So that stuck with me. Dressing for dinner. On Thanksgiving Day, Mother always requested that we dress for dinner. Candles on the table, the good silver, everything she thought would elevate the meal to a higher standard. Eventually, we began to enjoy her efforts, along with everything it required of us. David, our wayward brother, never complied. He ambled into the dining room, dressed in sweatpants and depression, spoke in sarcastic mumbles, made no attempt to be joyful or thankful. Having ceased to be himself many years ago, we seldom had expectations that he would join in family camaraderie. This year, for the first time, his place at the table is unoccupied. He is represented by an empty chair, but the memories still hover nearby. Pumpkin spice and cranberry, lingering in the air, the scent of his misery.
Oh, that's a sad last line. Thanks so much for sharing that, Nancy. Really
right.
powerful poem. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was Dressing for Dinner by Nancy Tennell. Next, let's go to Amanda Harris.
All right. Just a heads up, I don't think I'm going to be here next week.
So we'll
miss
definitely
you
miss you
guys.
if not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to leave you with this poem. The space between me and my brother. My brother moves a chess piece, ignorant of the fact there are multiple universes between him and his sister. In one universe, I am a bright, shining knight whose goal it is to stop shootings. In another, I am a pacifist. As I calculate spatial distance in my head, my brother checkmates me. Many things are fallacies, but one thing is true. Time is the only being that knows no rose.
Well, really interesting poem, as always, Amanda. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it was Amanda Harris with The Space Between Me and My Mother. Yeah, we've got a lot of poets on the prompt lines tonight, so let's keep moving quickly along. Carla Schwartz is next.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Hey, Carla, how you doing?
I am doing well, thank you very much. And I wasn't sure I'd make it because I was off the grid for the last 4 days.
Oh,
And
well, welcome back.
thank you. And I'm here. And this poem is called Praise the Excavated and the Rescued. Oh, this hole, this sand pit, this giant divot in the yard. Oh, open hull, oh, breach of earth, layered with only an icing of chocolate soil on top. Oh, steep canyon, oh, construction zone, oh, hoarder of slugs, of ants, turtle nests, oh, vast emptiness, having left the mountain of yourself, your contents that became a mountain so vast, rabbits won't even cross, robins stare askance, oh, hole, oh, swallower of the small creatures, the painted turtle tumbled into your mouth, the palm-sized baby bunny who leapt from the lilies into your seeming infinite maw. Whoa, 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 oh, baby rabbit, missing the soft blades of grass from beyond the lip, almost resigned to your dry end. Oh, rabbit, burrowed between stones, licking the acrid oil seeped from the forms lining the concrete pour. Oh, bunny, you've smelled fear. Oh, bunny, now that I have you in your hand, bunny, do you now finally, now that I have you in hand, bunny, do you now finally believe in God?
Very cool. Great rhythms and pacing in that poem. Thanks very much for sharing that, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah, take care. It was Carla Schwartz with Praise the Excavated and the Rescued. Let's go next to Rachel Grieve.
Hey.
Hey, Rachel. Good to see you. How you doing?
Good. So I got this prompt and I was like, well, this is easy because the moon smells like gunpowder. So
Well, that's interesting. All right.
I was like, I'm gonna write a poem about that. And I started this braid thing and I just couldn't finish it. So I did something else and the gunpowder survived, but in a totally different form.
Interesting. Yeah, well, let's hear it.
Okay, so this is called Lusaka and it's a series of haiku. Midnight, cat monsoon on a tin roof. Sunday greetings are songs with percussion. Crocodile awareness, a chunk of chicken that could be you. City pecking order, the urbanity of roosters. Termites crawl, traffic flow on the Great East Road. House, wall, street. Geckos disregard our browned glass. At the corner, odors of urine blaming the dogs. Into the compounds, one foot then the other, out of the compounds. Sideways love, the moon burns down to spent gunpowder. Swift dawn, birds fly from the sun.
Oh, really cool. Great haiku sequence. I love that sideways love, the moon burns down to spent gunpowder. And when he said that, I assumed it was some kind of synesthesia thing. But there's a comment that it actually does smell like gunpowder.
Yeah,
Is that a fact? That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I guess there's something where all of the dust on the moon has had no chemical reaction. So when it hits the air, it just gets that smell. And they were afraid. There was some fear that they would actually like explode a lunar lander.
Oh, wow.
Came back in, but it didn't. So
yeah, well, good thing. Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Thanks. It was Rachel Grieve with a haiku sequence, Lusaka. Next up, let's go to Christiana Doucette.
Hello.
Hey, Christiana. How you doing tonight?
Doing all right. Pulling up mine over here.
All right. Yeah.
I
Pulling up
keep
yours
clicking
too.
it and it keeps not coming up. There it is. Okay. I have been playing with like lines that you can read multiple ways. So I tried doing a contrapuntal. So the use of space here was a space between the two lines. And then I've been thinking when there's a lot going on, the place that I feel the most calm is in my garden. So I was thinking of it almost like a garden row. Down in between. So it's supposed to be able to be read down each column and then all the way across. And I put 5 syllables on each side.
Oh, wow. That's complicated.
So here we go. the earth crumbling in my hand. But lavender blossoms, busy bumblebees tumbling between these stems of thought like pollen pockets aren't already full of gold dust, as if they aren't plump Tinkerbells. Even the clumsy finding stigma sticks. What will be will be. They will see it through, seed the new, strew the garden paths with all. Purpling the wind, follow the sweet scent, garden rose open jewelers uncasing these dainty bangles. Summer solstice gleams hold all of time still, casting flowered spells. Caterpillars are behind their spun silk. Soon they will be free, wings spreading new worlds, summer air wafting their falling petals. Lavender blossoms purpling the wind. Busy bumblebees follow the sweet scent tumbling between garden rows, open these stems of thought like jewelers uncasing pollen pockets. Aren't these dainty bangles already full of summer solstice gleams? Gold dust, as if they hold all of time still. Aren't plump Tinkerbells casting flowered spells? Even the clumsy caterpillars are finding stigma sticks behind their spun silk. What will be, will be. Soon they will be free, they will see it through, wings spreading new worlds. Seed the new, strew the summer air, wafting garden paths with all their falling petals.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is definitely intricate. Yeah, really cool poem. We published a couple contrapuntal poems, but not many over the years. It's a difficult form to do. And then adding the syllable count, too, makes it even harder. What a great
I feel
challenge.
like when I do the syllable count, I like how it reads better than when I try to just like shove the things together. But I don't know. I'm just playing with it because I'm not very, I feel like this is a form that I'm not very good at yet. So I'm working at it.
Yeah, well, very cool. Well, it's definitely fun to play with in a cool example of it. Thanks for sharing that, Christiana.
Thank you.
Yeah. Christiana Doucette with the earth crumbling in my hand, but a contrapuntal poem. Let's go to Dick Westheimer next.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick, good to see you.
I will jump right in after qualifying this by saying I tried to write about deep space, but that just wasn't what the poem wanted to do. I always go to space.com each week to kind of look.
Yeah, I figured space might be coming up, so it's interesting I went somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay. Faraway time. The space bit, and mine sort of mirrors yours a tiny little bit. Has a table saw in it. Faraway time, the space beneath the cabinet I'm repairing is a mystery box. To an observer from a far-off galaxy, peering back in time, to me, bringing my fingers to my nose, sniffing the resin scent of the fresh sawn seams of pine bought from Andre's Supply back in 1985. The far-off observer man might wonder how this old guy will unfold himself from such a cramped space as I do, as I shift my weight from my butt to a three-point stance and look for some support to lean on. Perhaps I will linger a while longer in this plain pine frame and dream of hanging out at the lumberyard, learning from the unshaven men at the counter about what kind of screws to use, how to hinge a door and properly sharpen a saw, how to pick through 2x4s and find the tightest grain. The good part of all those men being contained in this patina yellowed wood. Matches the whites of your eyes, my wife smiles, revealing tributaries reserved for the faces of beautiful older women as she grips my forearm and helps me up. Mr. Faraway Observer smiles and dobs the back of his hand to his faraway cheek. I head to the workshop to find one more piece of that 40-year-old pine, its resin scent still alive, healing over the broken branches of time.
Really cool poem. Great rhymes throughout, especially, and great images. Thanks for sharing that, Dick.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Tim. Bye.
Yeah, it was Dick Westheimer with Faraway Time. Next, let's go to Mike Bales.
Oh, yeah. The Zoom should be working tonight. I was in a Zoom meeting this afternoon.
Yeah, you're looking good, Mike. Good to see you.
Oh, yeah. I'm not frozen.
Yeah, that's always helpful.
This braided high bun, it has a distinctive odor to it.
All right.
Farmlands. As I drive the The highway is surrounded by a spread of fields. Corn planted in the spring reaches upward. What a way to start the day, I say to myself. The expanse is endless and free. Morning awakens. The sun shines on me, and I recall time at my uncle's farms and spent with my cousins. I've traveled far, and in moments like this, memories draw me near. Once I gasped at the pungent smell. My cousins and I, as we passed a hog operation, jostled each other and said, "Who farted?" and laughed. 60 years ago, 60 years later, I drive toward the sun. I could drive forever. Endless skies. I take a long Sunday drive and let my thoughts go where they may. A poem, perhaps, or memories to share with friends. I realize I must turn around sometime and drive back into town. Tomorrow back to work. I was young once, but now I bear my age.
Oh, very cool. A duo-coup in the middle of that. Morning awakens, endless skies. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a couple. There's something which, maybe for the prompt, but it doesn't have a smell to it.
Oh, very cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Mike. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it was Mike Bales with Farmlands. Next up, let's go to Zachary May.
Hey, hey.
Hey, Zachary, how you doing?
I am good. And I went with outer space and similar to the moon gunpowder idea
Interesting.
in this one. So this is even in the nothing, something. Ben chattered the entire drive to summer camp. For 2 hours straight, my son related all of his new book, Death by Black Hole, space being one of our few common interests. 2 hours isn't long on the cosmic scale, but with no escape, let's just say a place where no one can hear you scream doesn't sound so bad. If that makes me a bad dad, so be it. I spent 2 hours learning how I could die. Spaghettified on a black hole's event horizon, squeezed into a diamond while diving into Jupiter's red spot, eyes popped on a naked spacewalk sniffing the burnt steak of vacuum. Don't worry, I'm told the sun will swallow us whole someday anyway. If an asteroid the width of 31 elephants doesn't crush us first. Dropping Ben off was a relief, for the first 10 minutes at least. Cigar smoke curls among the constellations.
Well, very cool. Yeah, great hymen with a nice haiku at the end. Thanks for sharing that, Zach.
Thank you.
Yeah, with Zachary May with even in the nothing, something. Yeah. All right, next up is Hamet Malik.
Hi.
Hey, Hamet, great to see you.
You too. Thanks, Tim. This turned into a braided hyphen again because I was enjoying them too much.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so I guess a lot of influence from the Rich Yeomans episode last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Flammable when watched. I'm a visual worker, which means I need a good-sized desk to fit my piles of papers at the angles required to see every task. My head tilts from side to side as I remind myself of the urgency of jobs. I fight the biggest fires first. Even the notebook I bought to corral the piles into a tighter space, where jobs get a line on a page rather than desk real estate, has a fan of papers beneath it, waiting to ignite. When someone asks for a job with a tomorrow angle, I worry. Spring fires. About the speed of flames, and scan everything again just in case. I stand at my desk as I hold new papers, a hummingbird. I look at my son sideways when he says he'd like to go to the doctor alone, and I hope this isn't a today fire with nowhere to land. I keep walking past his room, sniffing for smoke, check for singeing as I kiss his forehead above his laptop, watch to see if the cat turns her head. I always check the labels on their PJs, never use the column heater to dry their clothes, and all my scented candles sat unlit. I must have brought a paper home from work. Spring fires, a hummingbird with nowhere to land.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that last line. And a great use of the way that the braided hyphen lets the last line, which is so strong, stand, whereas if the haiku is at the end, it would overshadow the great last line. So it's something I think Lou Watts was talking about having like a good last line on the prose stuff kind of makes it so that the haiku doesn't work there. So that's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yep, thank you. And it's so fun to find a place to put them. It's a really cool. It's really cool.
Well, very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Hammett. Yeah. There's Hammett Malik with Flammable When Watched. Next, let's go to Brian O'Sullivan.
Hello.
Hey, Brian. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to be here. So yeah, I have a kind of newsy poem called Major Anomaly that has outer space at least as a conceptual goal.
Interesting.
Starts with a kind of newsy epigraph. SpaceX confirmed that the Starship numbered Ship 36 in the company's inventory experienced a major anomaly on a test stand as the vehicle prepared to ignite its 6 Raptor engines for a static fire test. Ship 36 sits static sojourner, test subject, waiting for its time to be tried. At Macy, its methane mingles with other gases, and it gets gone. A series of shocks in quick succession, a blast booms into a boundless blaze. You can smell the scientist's sweat, the smoky singeing of sinuses. The staff are safe, making room for a snide sight of me to snipe at the SpaceX boss. Hey Grok, guess who gambled badly? But slipping the bonds, those surly shackles of this stone, transcends petty party politics. Boat in a bottle, space in a bottle, the salty scent of the unknown survives. I sigh, shut off the TV, and slide out of bed, picking out the pump that goes to my chemo port and thinking about the pace and price of progress.
Oh, yeah, very cool. The alliterative verse poem, which we haven't seen in a while. We had, I think it was Marianne Corbett was the guest. When she was talking about alliterative verse and had a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really fun form to write in and a really cool example of it. Thanks for sharing that, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. There's Brian O'Sullivan with Major Anomaly. Let's go next to, Jayanthi Rangan is back for the first time in a good long while. Hey, Jayanthi, how you doing? There you go.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. It's been a while. Yeah, how have you
Yeah,
been?
it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me get that, get the poem. It's a very short one. Over here, what I want to say is the space that we are talking about here is just 6 inches. 6 inches, which a sperm has to swim to go and meet the egg. So the title is 15 centimeter marathon. It says, the teeny sperm swims almost a Pacific Ocean towards the love lane. The egg exudes a chemical scent for the right Olympian. From the 250 million near matches, only one, the gold medalist, stamps his DNA. The rest perish in acid, mucus, immune cell traps, and wrong fallopian. To top the unfairness of it all, the diva refuses his mitochondria and casts her own as a tradition. Such a rigged track.
That's really fun. Yeah, lots of science in that one. Thanks so much for sharing that 15 centimeter marathon. A tiny space indeed. Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that, Janthi. They're really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was Janthi Rangan with his 15 centimeter marathon. Yeah, and great to have you back, Janthi. Hope you come back again soon.
Oh, yes.
Great.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Well, next, let's go to Laura Berg.
Hello.
Hey, Laura. Great to see you.
You too. I heard the former British poet laureate talking about American poetry today, and he said it's like Niagara Falls. Like it's just writing everywhere. And, some of it's good and some of it isn't, but we're all part of it. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that aspect of it's definitely true.
Yeah. Why am I not able to? Sorry.
Oh,
I'll
it's all
share
right.
the poetry here. Okay. Oh, you're gonna show the poem, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna
Okay.
show it. Yeah.
Okay. So I did outer space, more or less, and it's still I'm getting worked on this poem. But night bed, day bed, balanced on a balcony in the telescope's dome on a mountain, an astronomer's cot suggests a need. Those wintry nights, as one calibrates, unravels spectra, gazes through cold and wind into the darkest sky in America, toward that beyond where constellations strum and nebulae, planets, stars appear, disappear, appear, to rest amidst celestial objects, each immense in its own tininess as the universe stretches. Once I saw a daybed in Marfa sculpted by Donald Judd, seeming to levitate in air scented with petrichor and sage, a plain wood platform to rest on in the Chihuahuan desert, contemplating light. And even despite this bed's name, to lie upon in starlit darkness and ponder galaxies, 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 no foreground, no background, no center, no end in sight.
Yeah, beautiful ending. And I love that I will go into space in all these poems. Thanks for sharing that, Laura.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was Laura Berg with Night Bed, Day Bed. Really cool. All right. Next, let's go to Jeremy McKay.
Hi.
Hey, Jeremy. Great to see you.
I'll have it open. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just go into it. It's a full page though.
Okay.
Boot camp lullaby. Cedar aromas, fresh ground coffee, cinnamon toast. None of that here. Just fresh soap, moisture from well-washed bodies, folded white skivvies, each cubby the same, each bunk sheet 45 degrees tight, corners, all meant to change me, all of me. So I become one in the space where there is no space. I know enough to fake the oneness, finding time to break away to the broom closet of my mind, or lie down and escape to my inner spaces. Memories and fantasies to cover the smell, to dam the brainwashing with a levee of my mother's songs and lullabies. The dam breaks, consonants fall, lullabies washed away. Here I am, learning teamwork. I find a place here where even if I march with 2 left feet, we are all still shipmates. Someone helps me with my rhythm, and I help them with their spelling. We share more than a Coke. Now I have friends. Our differences don't matter. I have your back, take my turn in the barrel, and do my best to keep up. We'll get through this. I will get through it and come out on the other side with stronger, reassembled lullabies.
Well, a very sweet poem, and that was I love that line too. The someone helps me with my rhythm, and I help them with their spelling. Great turn in that little one. Really, really fun boot camp lullaby. Thanks for sharing that, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jeremy McKay with Boot Camp
Pleasure.
Lullaby.
Pleasure.
Let's go next to Dennis Usden.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Dennis. Great to see you.
Great to see you and everybody that's here late at night. It's great to see the rest of our poetry people.
Yeah, it definitely
Fun.
is. It definitely
Really is. All right, this one's called Another Time. We arrived 2 hours early for our flight. The plane is delayed 3 hours. We walk the entire length of the airport, round and round a city of glass with humming fluorescent suns. Flashing signs catching our pupils, the smell of bleach here and there. Could this be the answer to climate change? Everything a consumer could want, shopping a mall of illusion for double the outside price. Weather balmy and mind control. You could take a jet plane to another mirage of culture, where they speak a different language, but the shops are all the same brand. When we finally board the plane, we roll off to the takeoff spot, but pilot announcement, ground stop. We return to the gate. A mentally ill person is escorted off the plane as claustrophobia creeps in. When we are finally off the ground, our meal is crackers and wine. A complete unknown on the video screens, singing us back to another time. This is how we are kept quiet in space, saltines and logarithms blowing in the wind.
Yeah, I love the turn at the end to the complete unknown, which we just watched that recently. Great movie.
Yeah, I love that movie. It's the greatest movie, actually, but it's amazing. Everybody was watching it for second or third time on the plane, and this all really happened. It was amazing.
Yeah, my son and daughter were caught on a plane for a few hours, a couple weeks ago too.
Many
it's
times.
A long wait. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing.
Not much fun.
No, definitely not. But that made the most of it, I guess. Thanks for sharing that, Dennis.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Dennis Usdon with Another Time. And next, let's go to Tina Deniclaw.
Hello.
Hey, Tina. Great to see you.
It's great to see you guys too. And let's see it. Mine is long, so I'm going to just jump right in. Okay, 20 hours on the bridge. He needed some space to think on the ripples of light far below, just a step away from the outer railing of the San Rafael Richmond Bridge. Not knowing the cold water would shatter every bone in his body like concrete, unforgiving. There must have been angel wing flutters, enfolding to calmness 1.2 million commuters, diverted to circle the whole of the bay. Quiet. We hoped for his rescue, not willing to add angst to his crisis. Into the night, moving a mile each half hour, my husband gave in to his bladder on the side of the road. And so did others before we all traveled through 2 hours of sulfurous slough on the northern tip of the bay. 10 hours for a 45-minute trip home. A man needed time to decide, so 7,000 square miles of people opened their placid eyes and waited. At 6 the next morning, he asked for help up, and a grateful hand clasped his with the gentle strength of a muscled arm, ready to hold the weight of him and give breath back to us all. Static traffic, not one honk. Long flight to sunrise.
Oh, very nice haiku at the end. A very powerful poem. Thanks for sharing that, Tina.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, it was Tina Deniclaw with 20 Hours on the Bridge. And let's go next to Mary Lisa D. Diminishes.
Hi.
Hey, Mary Lisa. Great to see you.
You too. It's been a little while.
It has. Yeah, it's been a few
Yeah.
weeks. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a short one. It's called I Spy Something, and I've been focusing lately on sacred places and things. So like my journal is one and my garden is the other. So this is called I Spy Something.
Okay.
I changed the second word. Sorry. It's now peppery. Peppery. Ery. Yeah. Deadheading peppery fuchsia geraniums. I lift my fingers afterward to catch a trace of their scent. It's you, many years ago, wearing a discontinued cologne. I think, yes, I need to answer your text. Yes, we should set a date to meet. Then I move on to tend the rest of the garden. Yes, I think this may have been how it was for you after me. My lingering scent on your fingertips, you lifting your hand to smell them. I think this exact garden, this way, never again. But still, among these flowers, I spy a bright light in the corner of my yard.
Yeah, great ending. I love that. And love the concision and you know, the yeah, stretched down really a lot going on in that little poem. Thanks for sharing that, Mary Lisa.
Thank you. I think somebody said it was an American sonnet, so I don't know. We'll
It
see.
looks like it. I was my
14 lines, I think.
Yeah, for 14 lines. There you go.
If that's all it takes to be an American, you know.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Mary Lisa. Great as always. Yeah. Take
Good
care.
night, everybody.
Yeah.
Good night.
Yeah, Mary Lisa diminishes with I spy something. I believe that's everybody on the Zoom. Yeah. Let's go share Ted's poem. And Ted says, once again, this picture drives that poem. Very subtle. This poem also claims that all scents are formulated. Interesting. He's got a picture of a close-up view, as you see, of a giraffe here. A giraffe's eye. Or, I mean, not a giraffe. A zebra. A zebra's eye. And here is the poem by Ted. Zebra. Humans kill for such eyelashes. It quells their deception to see, but not focus. Asked if they're even qualified to walk the same earth as this, they distance themselves and deal with the awe behind pixels and isolation. But there's no clarity. They've looked the world over, maybe a scent, they wonder, to justify the length of those lashes. Maybe tempt with green apples, the way we imagine or manufacture the scent of green apples. Would such grace accept us then? Never mind experience. There we think we have the upper hand, but stare alone can make us bow in submission. With all our distrust, our throwing of fit, our dial of war full of upticks, we're lucky to imagine feeding. There are no green apples in Serengeti. We cannot entice majestic, even if we flutter our eyes to tart. Scent in a distance is only an invention. Scent is an invention. And here you go with that photograph. Again, thanks so much for sharing that as always, Ted. And I believe that's going to wrap up the prompt lines for tonight. Is there anybody? Yeah, that's going to do it. So it is time for the haiku for the week. And I took last night my daughter to a play. It was really fun down in LA at the Geffen Playhouse. And here is a haiku we were thinking about, based on a little experience there. Here we go. This is the haiku. Show dates on a wall of posters, the years missing. Show dates on a wall of posters, the years missing. And it is strange how you look back and they don't include the year in almost any of them. So you never know how long ago those posters go. But then so much is missing too. Thanks for listening to the coup. And that's going to wrap up the show for this week. Now let's see what Katie's prompt was for next week. And Katie's prompt is going to be this. Write a poem in which a wall comes down. Write a poem in which a wall comes down. A simple sort of one stroke prompt. Write a poem in which a wall comes down. So many possibilities there. That's your prompt for next week. And next week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be Yoda Olenek. And Yoda is a chef. I think the only actual chef in our Tribute to Food issue coming up, or that just came out, I should say. And she's got a memoir, Salt and Sour, My Recipes for Starting Over. Also, a whole bunch of poems. It's going to be fascinating to talk to her about the relationship between food and poetry. So many metaphors there, like we talked about with Ruth Reichel in the interview section, but a lot to talk about with Yoda. That's going to be really fun. That is Rattlecast number 298, Sunday, June 29th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Good night.